Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you for joining me here. Hope you're having a great day and your day gets a whole lot better as a result of watching this video. What I like to do is kind of look at this descending trend, kind of identify the local bottom, which is this 0.618 fib level, 67.5. There's a chance we do pivot and bounce here. This level is held for a good while, right? So oftentimes that can stimulate a reversal, but once more, it's far too early to tell. There is some back-end data here that's quite impressive in the understanding of the fact that we're probably going to be going still to the downside because late longs just don't learn, right? It's kind of one of those things. Most of it's based on how high a leverage those folks are using, and there's just too much juicy liquidation below the price, I feel, for the price to be able to rip higher, okay? Market makers like to make sure that all opposition is opposed first before they move the price in a different direction. So there's a good chance we go a little bit lower here to sweep this lower liquidation range as low as about 66, maybe 65.5K, and then back up from there. Those are just my thoughts here from a bird's eye view. Let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper to make sure we understand everything else. All right, folks, before we get started, quickly hit that like button, maybe even subscribe. Greatly appreciate you doing so. We got a lot of new subscribers over yesterday and a lot of good feedback here as well. Views are increasing a little bit. I think people are starting to get more interested in crypto as the price continues to bottom out, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but it's actually the truth because people are kind of averaging in a little bit more lately. And I get that. I'm actually doing the same thing myself too, just because we don't really truly know where the bottom's going to be. While we could go lower, probably will go lower, it's best to presume that averaging into your position is a good call right now. Speaking of averaging, we can see 68,700 is that upper range of open interest, or sorry, specifically that is the order block here. It is a form of open interest too, because that's right there at that resistance range here. So 69 to 70,000 is that local resistance. And if we go a little bit further, 72.4 still has that large order block. And below the price, it's kind of spread out the 66 to 65K range. So the whole point of this is just kind of understanding local resistance would be that 68.7 mark. So heaven forbid, you're going to be taking a late long right now, which I still don't think is necessarily the greatest idea. Make sure your profit target's kind of within those tighter margins, well below 68.7. Certain sectors are doing well today, but they're mostly just performing synonymous in a lot of ways with Bitcoin. So we're really not going to dive into that today because for the most part, different sectors perform better or worse than others. And at this point, a lot of similarities here. In other words, altcoins are responding the same as Bitcoin right now. Kind of stuck on stupid until Bitcoin decides what direction it wants to head, which makes sense. It's that kind of the safer play, right? That's what you should be doing too, not being stuck on stupid, but mostly just being, sideline material here, kind of waiting for the right time to strike. You want to kind of try to, trying to get in too early to a trade is generally a bad idea. You want to wait for that trend to establish itself, and we don't have an established trend just yet. When sideways activity occurs, it can be a little bit messy. That's kind of where we're at right now. We got a pretty big spread here. 66.4 for the lower area of liquidation and roughly 67,000 for the upper area. Okay. Again, I'm rounding up a little bit there, but for the most part, those are kind of the two areas there. And if we look at the 30-day liquidation, there's a little bit more to the downside here, as low as 65K. So a sweep to 65K would be very sensible before our next pivot or bounce to the upside. I'm leaning more towards that being the case. Now we take a look here at the back end, just kind of jump in. 3-day time frame on the left-hand side. I had this pulled up on my Twitter, Telegram, and Discord as well. 66.5 is kind of that lower range. We got a chunk, basically a $1,000 chunk between 66.5 and 65.5, right? So that's the area of liquidation there for the local, basically last 3 days worth of trading, okay? So generally speaking, the 3-day time frame is pretty consistent with these trends because oftentimes you'll see things happen in threes, right? You have 3 white soldiers where the price moves up for 3 days in a row and you typically have a 4th red day to follow. In this case, we have 3 days worth of liquidation and it seems pretty likely that we're going to see that level hit. Now, again, I don't trade based solely on liquidation. I like to use confluence and confirming factors. So that isn't the only guide here, but it's a pretty big motivator, right? It's kind of a big magnet that's kind of pulling the price towards that level. 68,000, 67,000 is the open interest range here. Obviously, we're going to see that happen when you go range bound for a little while. 5 billion in short liquidation delta kind of tells us that we shouldn't be taking any longs right now. That basically just tells us we're moving against the grain. This is also another reason why we shouldn't take any longs. With open interest, while it is increasing, we have a delta of roughly 50% that is generally positive. It's unpositive or very disadvantageous to have a 95% true retail long percentage here. That delta is way too high. It tells us there's too many longs, too many retail longs FOMOing in right now. And what happens when retail longs FOMO in? Market makers see that, they want to reverse the price. So distinct probability we go lower because of that. And we look at the overall sentiment here. 68,000 is a pretty solid resistance range here. We have, ever since we've broken below that, we've spent about 18 to 24 hours below that level. So, it's kind of just one of those areas here that it's not really phenomenal, honestly. Now, when it comes to the daily time frame, same scenario here as well. We're not seeing any significant divergence. There's nothing spectacular here with our RSIs. Just kind of an indication that, hey, we're in a situation where we're more likely than not going to go sideways and or down. Now, if we look at this high volume candle that was kind of fizzled out here, while it's bullish engulfing candle, it's still not strong enough. While it is good to have high volume, that was mostly just hitting that low point, okay? So when I see that, and with us being below the cloud, below this descending trend line, there's a lot of reasons why I don't feel confident in this breakout here actually breaking out. Now, I could be totally wrong. It'll probably be 69,000 by the time you watch this. It's generally how it works. But the whole concept here is that based on best practice, you're better off not taking a long into these key level resistances. That's the bottom line. I don't care if I'm right or wrong at the end of the day. The important thing here is that we're doing what's right and not forcing a trade into that key level resistance or that confluence above the price. There's too many things above the price right now to lead me to believe that we're going to go just a bit higher, right? It's half the reason why we're in a short position for our community here, right? Obviously, I secured profits at our first take profit target, but the trailing stop loss engaged, ended up closing out and a little bit more profit there. Okay, so once more, different strategies, of course, but we did short for a good reason. And I think at this point, I'm leaning more towards a secondary short versus just trying to take a long right now. A long doesn't make a ton of sense just yet. Okay, so wait for one more sweep of the downside, maybe get that overextension, consider a play that way. That's what I'm leaning more towards, or waiting for a short in the 69, 70K range, possibly even a little bit higher. All right, so those are things that I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Why don't you comment below and let us know? Love to hear it. Appreciate your interaction and obviously liking and subscribing. Really greatly appreciate that. We'll see you in the next one. Quick heads up to our traders. We got a 15% discount on trading fees if you use my link to register through Bitunix. Links down below in the description. All right, folks, quick look here at ETH, just double checking some important stuff. Looks like 2,000 is that key level resistance, just as 68K is for Bitcoin. So the likelihood of further downside is increasing as that number starts to become more present for Bitcoin as far as that local rejection zone. We can see this ascending type of trend here that's pretty consistent with a bearish type of flag pattern. So generally speaking, these do break to the downside. Not that we want to trade on a pattern alone, but that does incentivize the price to go a bit lower. Now, of course, we had this rectangular type of pattern where Bitcoin is essentially establishing a descending channel. Those are generally positive as far as a comparison from Ethereum to Bitcoin. We can see higher highs and higher lows and lower lows and lower highs for Bitcoin. So it's obvious that ETH is still a bit stronger on the lower timeframes, but that can, of course, shift and change because as we saw here previously, when Bitcoin pulled back by a small margin, ETH pulled back by a large margin. So we're seeing pretty significant dumps from ETH once Bitcoin loses its key levels. So we want to pay attention to that. Let's go ahead and take a look here actually at some altcoin back in data here, just kind of see where we're at. So when it comes to Ethereum, we're going to double check here. So first of all, liquidation short delta is still to the downside, suggesting we're seeing a transition, but we're still bearish overall. When we look at the liquidation, we can recognize here too, from the macro perspective, 1900 still has that big chunk, and just as well 2150. What we want to zoom in though here is kind of double checking some important stuff as far as the local timeframes, because I do like to see kind of what the local liquidation looks like, and it is starting to stack up to the low 1900s, upper 1800 range. So a lot of liquidation at that 1900 average, leading me to believe that a pullback is much more sensible at this point here for Ethereum. Okay, now when we kind of take a look at the 4-hour time frame, we are in kind of a bearish type of pennant pattern as well, consistently retesting these lower lows. That suggests further downside and that Ethereum should continue to progress lower. I think a long in the 1900 range makes a little bit more sense here if you're going to consider one, just based on the fact that that's sweeping the local lows here, and we'd hit that liquidation range just below the price to effectively clear that out. So those are just kind of some areas that I'm paying attention to here. It's still very early and premature. I think with us being in this transition right now, it's best not to FOMO in, but I'm leaning more towards the price pulling back to the low 1900 range than I am to see 2150, for example. All right, and then once more, that's just based on the local timeframes here. A lot can change between now and tomorrow, so make sure you stay abreast. Make sure obviously you enable alerts too as well for these videos, because a lot of folks are like, "Hey, I didn't know that you rolled out with a video." I do this every day. All right, so just heads up on that. Either way, thanks again for watching. Don't forget to comment below too. Make sure you let me know what your thoughts are on ETH. Are you trading this coin? What do you plan to do with it? All right, folks, quick look here at Solana, kind of seeing where we're at here. We are actually in this lower area of liquidation when we identified from yesterday about $82 as a likely pivot point. Now, with us being consolidating in this range, even though we did pivot and run back up to $84 on lower time frames, Bitcoin is diverging, can't break 68,000, likely to hit its 66K liquidation pocket. So I think that we're in a distinct probability here for Solana to effectively continue a bit lower. But once more, we are in a tentative support range, so just keep that in mind. Now, we don't want to attach ourselves to tentative anything, so just bear in mind that it's not the best situation here to consider longs. You're much better off taking shorts until we become either overextended or Bitcoin finds its bottom, which is still truly looking for that. All right. Now, good news is Solana, up until the last 12 hours, has done pretty well for itself with its recovery. But the problem is it's pulling back just as well as Bitcoin is right now, and regardless of how much better it looked on lower time frames yesterday, it's absolutely below its local low here of $83, and that suggests further downside. Now let's quickly look here at some backend data. Let's go ahead and double check the, let's just go with the monthly for open interest and just kind of recognize where we're at here. Open interest for the monthly is in the range of $80 to $90. We already discussed that yesterday, so we're kind of still in this large range right now, but the divergence is occurring on the liquidation delta, letting us know that we are much higher to the downside than the upside, so more shorts than longs, and this $82 liquidation pocket looks like it has been mostly swept. There's a little bit left at 81, so truth is we could go a bit lower, but there's not a ton of incentive for the price to go lower outside of Bitcoin kind of pulling back, all right? So with the expectation that Bitcoin's going to hit that 66K range, I think it's a distinct probability that Solana also moves lower and probably continues a bit below this $80 to $81 range. All right. So we're going to double check that and keep that in mind. When we look at some indicators here, the truth is we're not really in a great situation. We're under 50 in the RSI. We're not really putting ourselves in a good position, right? So overall, taking a long end of this is just kind of a bad idea. You are better off waiting for Bitcoin to effectively bottom out first, right? So between now and whenever that happens, I would say be patient, try not to force a long. If you're going to take any kind of trade right now, a short makes a lot more sense, even though we're kind of getting into this local support range. So I really don't like to try to take a short into support, nor do I try to take a longs into resistance. Those are considered breakout trades, not always the most successful. So just some friendly advice there, but I think pumping the brakes is probably the best strategy you could have right now, and just waiting this one out until we get to a better bottoming position, because right now it's certainly not looking great in either direction. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? All right, folks, quick look here at Chop Suey, kind of seeing what's going on. It is absolutely one of those scenarios right now. We're seeing this descending type of breakdown of that local low, basically that local midline here. So we're going to focus on the back end data here, just quickly on identifying the side-by-side with Bitcoin. And it's pretty obvious to me that we're seeing very synonymous behavior here with a significant pullback initially when Bitcoin topped out at 71K. And then, of course, we see this kind of consolidation and down. So this is usually a bearish type of sign, inconsistent, of course, with Bitcoin there, just kind of letting us know that further downside would make more sense for this coin. Is it worth shorting at this exact moment? It's difficult to say just based on the simple fact that we could very well bottom out at any point, but I'm also leaning a lot more towards Bitcoin pulling back further. And if it does that, then we're distinctly going lower here with SUI, because it's not like it's performing better than Bitcoin right now. Okay, open interest is 92 cents and 86 cents. Those are potential support ranges for SUI, and we can recognize here as well liquidation short delta is high, much like many other altcoins right now. There is a lot of liquidation to the downside also at 92 cents, so a short to 92 seems very practical at this point, just based on the overall sentiment and how things are moving right now with the market. So let's double check kind of where we're at here. We did lose our local center line here, this 0.5 fib level, broke below that tentative support, if you will. Bitcoin's also in a similar situation with 67,000. So keep that in mind. Bitcoin progresses lower, SUI will too. Bitcoin responds well to this bottom here of 67,000 that retest. Then we're probably going to go up for SUI too. All right. So try not to get too stuck on how good or bad this coin is on its own, because it's mostly just following Bitcoin like a lost puppy. At this point, though, we're under RSI at 50. Stochastic swinging down. Those are generally unfavorable signs you want to look for when considering a short position. And then when we look at the Ichimoku cloud, holding pretty strong for resistance there on this descending trend. So I like what I see here in the overall sense as far as potential for a short on this coin. Just bear in mind when you short this coin, it comes with inherent inherently larger risk because it's just such a volatile coin. So while it should and could continue lower, I think the odds are higher. It's still inherently more risky. So position size effectively and make sure you're not using too large of a bag there. But at this point, I think we're going to probably continue a bit lower until Bitcoin can kind of start to stabilize. What are your thoughts? Why don't you comment below and let me know. Quick heads up, traders, we got a $12,000 deposit reward bonus between now and March 10th. Use my link to register if you've registered in the past, automatically eligible. Links down below for more information. All right, folks, quick look here at XRP, just double checking some important stuff. We talked about this range from yesterday. I just want to kind of highlight this. We do see a pretty significant potential here for a channel, right? And that channel should break to the downside based on it being derived from the upside and essentially being a bearish type of channel, right? So no guarantees it's going to break down because of that. That's not the reason to trade. I just like to highlight that so you understand kind of how it's performing versus Bitcoin. Because when you look at the side-by-side here for XRP, while it is generally strong and we're working well within our ascending trend, we're testing that ascending trend line and potentially losing that convergence, right? So that could be a shift in momentum here, pushing the price action lower for XRP, especially if Bitcoin revisits 66,000. So just keep that in mind. We're not in a good place. It's kind of a precarious situation overall. Let's look at XRP and just kind of see here. I want to reaffirm the open interest ranges here for you, just so you understand, because we did highlight this last couple of days, but some people are new to the channel. By the way, welcome aboard, of course. Thank you so much for joining and liking the videos. We can see 152 and 140 is kind of that upper and lower range. So until we break either above or below that, we can presume this range is going to continue. That's how range-bound activity works. But when it comes to the overall circumstance here with liquidation short delta being so high, it implies that more people are shorting than taking longs in this coin, but it also suggests that 150 to 152 could be next, right? So if you're going to be considering a short in this coin, be prepared to maybe average in and those levels once that liquidation's hit if Bitcoin can move past 68,000. Bitcoin cannot rally past 68K. I think we're going to be in a slow, precipitous downtrend here for XRP specifically. I mean, well, most altcoins specifically, but XRP on its own, it's testing its ascending trend here, right? So we're not in a good position to be like that we're just going to go higher because of this. Now, obviously, you want to wait for that trend to continue to progress, but for the most part, we're right in this range here. Losing this 50-day SMA on the 4-hour to me is kind of going to be that indicator that I'm looking for. Once more, just kind of gives us perspective that over the last 50 candles, the 4-hour time frame is reflecting a divergence, and we could very well see further downside for this coin. So XRP certainly looks like it wants to run lower to sweep some of those some of that liquidation, but with all the liquidation delta being so high, and just generally speaking, the fact of the matter that Bitcoin is likely to go lower and most alts are kind of laying down, leads me to believe we're going to see some divergences here today with most altcoins being red on the market today. Those are my thoughts though. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Love to hear it.